The economist stepped off the bullet train at Tokyo Station in 2023, his mind filled with decades of Western analysis about Japan's economic stagnation. He expected to find a nation in decline, struggling with the aftermath of its lost decades. Instead, he found something that challenged every assumption he had carried across the Pacific. The streets were immaculate. The infrastructure was flawless. The society functioned with a precision that made other developed nations look chaotic. Crime was virtually non-existent. Social cohesion was remarkable. Life expectancy was among the world's highest. If this was failure, what did success look like? The puzzle deepened when he examined the data. Japan's GDP had barely grown for 30 years. By conventional metrics, this was economic catastrophe. Yet Japanese citizens consistently ranked among the happiest in the world. Their savings rates were high. Their debt-to-income ratios were manageable. Their work-life balance was improving. Something fundamental was missing from the standard analysis. The world had labeled Japan's experience a cautionary tale about economic mismanagement and demographic decline. But what if Japan wasn't failing at the old model of growth? What if it was succeeding at something entirely new? The growth obsession. To understand Japan's supposed failure, we must first examine the assumptions that define success in the modern global economy. Since World War II, economic thinking has been dominated by a single metric: gross domestic product growth. Nations are ranked by their ability to increase this number year after year. Stagnant GDP equals stagnant society. This obsession with perpetual growth emerged from a specific historical moment. Post-war reconstruction required massive increases in production, consumption, and infrastructure development. The countries that could grow fastest would dominate. Japan mastered this game better than anyone, achieving decades of spectacular GDP expansion that transformed it from a war-torn archipelago into an industrial superpower. But by the 1990s, Japan had reached a different stage of development. Its infrastructure was complete. Its population was educated. Its basic needs were met. The question became, what comes after you've already built everything you need? The Western prescription was clear: keep growing, increase consumption, boost productivity, expand markets. Japan tried this approach for years, implementing stimulus packages, monetary easing, and structural reforms. Nothing worked. GDP remained stubbornly flat. What economists missed was that Japan had encountered the limits of growth-based development. It had achieved something unprecedented in human history: a post-scarcity society within environmental constraints. The challenge wasn't how to grow more, but how to live well within those constraints. The demographic crisis, international observers pointed to Japan's aging population as proof of terminal decline. Fewer workers meant less economic dynamism. An aging society meant higher costs and lower innovation. The demographic pyramid was inverting, creating an impossible burden on the working-age population. This analysis assumed that human worth is measured by economic productivity, that innovation requires youth, and that population growth drives prosperity. But Japan's experience suggested different possibilities. As the population aged, productivity per worker actually increased. Companies invested more heavily in automation and efficiency. Workers became more skilled and experienced. The economy required fewer people to produce the same output, freeing human energy for other pursuits. The aging society also drove innovation in unexpected directions. Japan became the world leader in robotics, not to replace human workers, but to support an aging population. It developed the most sophisticated elder care systems, the most efficient health care delivery, and the most sustainable urban planning. These weren't signs of decline. They were previews of solutions the entire world would soon need. The happiness paradox. Perhaps most puzzling to outside observers was Japan's happiness paradox. Despite economic stagnation, Japanese citizens reported high levels of life satisfaction. This contradicted every model that linked GDP growth to human well-being. The explanation lay in what economists call the hedonic treadmill. After a certain point, additional income doesn't increase happiness. What matters more is relative income, social cohesion, and quality of life. Japan had achieved high levels in all these areas. Japanese workers had shorter commutes than most developed nations. Their cities were walkable and efficient. Their crime rates were negligible. Their social safety nets were comprehensive. Their cultural institutions were thriving. By every measure except GDP growth, Japanese quality of life was exemplary. This suggested that the Western model of development maximizing economic growth to maximize human welfare might be fundamentally flawed. Japan had discovered that beyond a certain threshold, more stuff doesn't make people happier. Better relationships, cleaner environments, and stronger communities do. The sustainability model. Environmental economists had long argued that infinite growth on a finite planet was impossible. Japan's experience provided the first large-scale test of what a steady-state economy might look like. Instead of constantly expanding resource consumption, Japan focused on efficiency, recycling, and optimization. Japanese energy consumption per capita was among the lowest in the developed world, despite maintaining high living standards. Its waste recycling rates were extraordinary. Its urban planning maximized livability while minimizing environmental impact. This wasn't stagnation, it was sustainability. The country had essentially achieved what environmental scientists called degrowth, maintaining high quality of life while reducing resource throughput. This model would become essential as climate change forced all nations to reconcile economic ambitions with planetary boundaries. The innovation paradox. Critics argued that Japan's economic stagnation reflected declining innovation. Without the pressure of rapid growth, companies became complacent. R&D spending focused on incremental improvements rather than breakthrough discoveries. The nation was falling behind more dynamic economies, but this missed Japan's fundamental reorientation toward different types of innovation. While Silicon Valley pursued disruptive technologies that created new markets, Japan perfected technologies that improved existing systems. Japanese innovation focused on quality, durability, and user experience rather than novelty and scale. This approach produced remarkable results in unexpected areas. Japan led the world in materials science, precision manufacturing, and systems integration. Its innovations in transportation, urban planning, and social organization influenced practices globally. The difference was that Japanese innovation aimed at optimization rather than disruption. Global implications. As other developed nations confront similar challenges, aging populations, environmental constraints, and the limits of consumption-driven growth, Japan's experience becomes increasingly relevant. What looked like failure in the 1990s now appears prophetic. European nations are grappling with demographic transitions that mirror Japan's experience. Their economies are maturing beyond the point where traditional growth strategies remain viable. Climate targets are forcing reconsideration of growth-oriented development models. Japan's lost decades weren't lost at all. They were an investment in discovering how advanced societies can thrive within environmental and demographic constraints. The country became a laboratory for post-growth development, testing approaches that the rest of the world will eventually need. The corporate philosophy revolution, Japan's transformation extended beyond macroeconomic indicators into the very DNA of corporate culture. While Western companies chased quarterly earnings and rapid expansion, Japanese corporations adopted what management scholars called patient capital, a long-term orientation that prioritized sustainability over short-term profits. Toyota's production system became a global case study, but observers missed its deeper implications. The company wasn't just optimizing manufacturing, it was pioneering a business philosophy that treated waste elimination as more important than revenue maximization. This wasn't efficiency for growth's sake, it was efficiency for its own sake, recognizing that perfect processes were inherently valuable. This philosophy spread throughout Japanese industry. Companies invested decades perfecting products that already functioned well. They refined user experiences rather than creating new markets. They built relationships with suppliers spanning generations rather than constantly seeking cheaper alternatives. The Western observer might see stagnation, but Japanese managers saw mastery. The social capital dividend. As economic growth slowed, Japan discovered an unexpected dividend: social capital. The energy that other nations poured into competitive accumulation was redirected toward community building, cultural preservation, and social harmony. Japanese neighborhoods developed levels of social cohesion that astonished foreign researchers. Crime rates fell to levels that made police work almost ceremonial. Public spaces were maintained through community cooperation rather than government enforcement. Social trust reached heights that enabled remarkable innovations in governance and public service delivery. This social capital became economically valuable in ways that GDP calculations couldn't capture. Transaction costs plummeted when trust was high. Innovation accelerated when cooperation replaced competition. Quality of life improved through mechanisms that had nothing to do with individual purchasing power. The wisdom of constraints, perhaps. Japan's greatest discovery was the creative power of constraints. Limited land forced innovations in urban planning that maximized livability. Limited resources drove efficiency improvements that other nations envied. Limited population growth created pressures for automation and productivity that kept the economy competitive despite demographic headwinds. What looked like limitations became advantages. Japan's constraints forced it to solve problems that other nations could still ignore through expansion and resource consumption. When the rest of the world eventually confronts similar constraints, and climate change guarantees they will, Japan's solutions will become invaluable. The economist who arrived expecting to find decline instead found a preview of the future. Japan hadn't failed to grow. It had succeeded in evolving beyond growth towards something more sustainable, more humane, and ultimately more resilient. The world's obsession with GDP growth may itself be the relic of a bygone era. Japan's quiet revolution suggests that true prosperity might lie not in having more, but in needing less while living better. The lost decades were actually found decades. Discovering a new model for human flourishing in the 21st century. As the global economy confronts the limits of infinite growth on a finite planet, Japan's experience transforms from cautionary tale to instruction manual. The nation that supposedly lost its way may have actually found the path forward for all advanced societies. The stagnation was preparation. The decline was evolution. The failure was success by metrics we hadn't yet learned to measure.